America is a very individualist society. And as an American, having lived in Korea for the past 34 years in a very collectivist society, there were things about Korean culture that were familiar and understandable, but there are ways in which Korea's collectivism permeates the culture that I didn't fully appreciate until recently. Hello there. It is a Tuesday afternoon. I'm in southeastern Seoul in the neighborhood of Panggi-dong. I've come to Olympic Park. I haven't been out here in quite a while. I've seen a few concerts here, 3. I saw Eric Clapton twice in '97 and 2011, and my wife and I came out here for Green Day in 2010. But I'm very picky about which performers I see. Concerts here are expensive, so if I'm going to spend the money on it, I want to make sure it's somebody I really, really want to see. And all 3 shows that I saw here were fantastic. Green Day especially phenomenal. The park first opened in 1986 as a venue for both the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Olympics. And it's open to the public year-round. Any day of the week you come here, you'll find people exercising, jogging, riding bikes, or just hanging out, even when there's nothing going on. It's hot today. There's a cool breeze, and it's not as hot as it has been, actually. Actually, the breeze is really cool, really nice. But there's not a whole lot of people out here today. I have seen it busy at times when I've passed through here. And you'll find art installations throughout the park. But I'm not here to talk about the park today. It's a good setting for this video because it's emblematic of the topic I want to talk about. In my previous video, I talked about some of the ways I've changed since I've been living in Korea. Things that I attribute to living in Korea, even though they might not be exclusive to Korea. I might have had these influences had I lived elsewhere. Looks like a military plane. It's a question I sometimes get asked, and I didn't really know how to answer until I sat down to start thinking about it. And when I set out to make that video, I had intended to focus primarily on the influence Korea's collectivist culture has had on me and how that has changed me more than anything. This is something I had not thought about prior to considering this question when I was thinking about making this video. And in the time I did think about it, I had an idea of what I wanted to say about it, of how I think it had changed me. But in the process of filming the video and talking about the examples I've seen here and, incidents in my childhood compared to incidents in Korea, that kind of thing, I came to realize Korea's collectivist culture hasn't really changed me. I've always had a collectivist streak. I just didn't really recognize it. America is known for its individualist culture, and Americans are known to be fiercely independent. And I grew up in the southeastern United States in the suburbs of Atlanta. And, oh, there's another one. And in the Southeast, you do have this strong individualistic culture, but there's also a form of collectivism there that I think is stronger maybe than other parts of America. Because, really, America, when you think about it, isn't just one culture. It is a collection of cultures. Cultures that are regional, cultures that are based on ancestry and ethnicity. It's such a hodgepodge. And the culture that has developed in the Southeast is both individualistic and collectivist to a degree. It's a kind of relational collectivism, meaning when you act in the interest of the group, it's not for the interest of the group that you're acting. You're acting in the interest of the people you know in the group. So your neighbors, your family members, people at your church, the people you meet through your kids' Little League baseball team. There's an expression I heard a lot growing up in the South: we take care of our own. That pretty much sums it up. That's the nature of collectivism in the Southeast. It's local and it's based on relationships. Collectivism in Korea is group collectivism. It's based on membership in the group, not on the relationships you have with other people in the group. During the Joseon dynasty, which was basically the last Korean kingdom, Confucianism became the official state ideology. They even went so far as to suppress Buddhism, not eradicate it, but suppress it. And the ideals of Confucianism became deeply ingrained in Korean culture and Korean society. That's where you get all the strict social hierarchies, the familial piety, but also this group collectivism arises from that. The first aspect of Korea's collectivist culture that I really came into contact with and was able to understand was a local, more relational kind of thing. When you go to weddings or funerals, you give money. And this is rooted, again, in that Confucianist culture from the Joseon dynasty. There's this concept called bujo, which you can translate as communal support or mutual assistance. It goes back at least to the late Joseon dynasty because it appears in documents from the time. It's where local communities would come together in times of hardship and need. If you were struggling in some way, and they would share resources. It usually wasn't money because at the village level, people didn't have money to share, but it might be rice, it might be labor. It could be anything, any resources you have that somebody else needs, you share it in their time of need. People in the upper class might share money in that way, but money didn't really become a focus of bujo until the middle of the 20th century, after the Korean War. So you go back to the 1960s, and now you've got this concept of bujogum. Bujogum is assistance money, and from that comes the custom of giving joigum, which is condolence money at a funeral, or chukweegum, which is congratulatory money at a wedding. But that all goes back to that concept of bujo that started in the Joseon dynasty. By the way, this slope we just came down, this mound, this ridge we were walking on, this is a fortification, an earthen fortification that dates back to the 4th century. It was constructed by the Baekje kingdom when they had their capital in this area. And one of these days I will come back and talk about this because I want to do a video about Baekje when they had their capital here in what is now southeastern Seoul. Now today, this concept of bujogum, assistance money, isn't really about assistance anymore. It's just about giving, right? It's about giving money. It's an expectation. It's an aspect of the collectivist culture that is viewed today in a negative light, a kind of demand without asking. And it is a legitimate cause of stress for a lot of Korean people. They spend a significant amount of money on weddings and funerals and first birthdays and whatnot. And there's so much tied to it beyond just the giving itself. There's the factor of how much do I give, right? It's based on different criteria, right? How close am I to the person? There's also the factor of should I go to the wedding or funeral or should I not go? How much do I give if I go? How much do I give if I don't go? Because even if you don't go, you still feel pressed to send money in your absence. And then let's say you go to college friend's wedding and your other friends from your group are going. You don't want to give less than your other friends. So there's all this pressure. How is the other person going to view my gift? Are they going to think I gave too little? Are they going to question why I gave so much? And especially during the peak wedding season in the spring, you can spend a significant chunk of money during that time. And it's not just about people you know. In Korea, you sometimes find yourself at the weddings and funerals of people you don't know because they are connected somehow to somebody you do know. Imagine if you're a manager at some company and somebody on your team comes to you and says, hey, my uncle died, the funeral's out of town, I need to get off work a little early today to go out there. Would you go with him? Probably not. You don't know his uncle, you don't know his family, you know him. But I met somebody at a funeral who did just that. A cousin of my wife came to the funeral with his boss. His boss knew nobody there, just my wife's cousin. But he came and he gave money. So there are stresses and pressures involved with collectivism at that level sometimes, but that's something I could relate to, something I could understand from my own culture. Another expression we have that I heard a lot growing up is, I would give this person the shirt off my back if they needed it. That's how you feel about your relationships, right? And that relational collectivism we have in the Southeast. So this is something that I can, understand. And when we think of group collectivism, there are obvious examples that we can point to that also I can understand. A good example, after the 1997 economic crisis, where Korea's economic system just crashed, right? The financial system just crashed. It was a major, major crisis. The IMF stepped in, gave Korea a loan. To raise money toward paying back that loan, they instituted a gold donation campaign, asking people to donate their gold to help raise money for paying back the IMF. The gold campaign raised 227 tons of gold from 3.5 million people, raising over 2 billion won. No, not won. I misspoke. They raised over $2.1 billion. 3.5 million people donated their gold jewelry and their gold items to help raise money to pay back the IMF. This was a national tragedy, this financial crisis, because people lost their businesses. But then in the aftermath of that, you have all these people coming together. That's the key word, together, to raise money to help pay back the IMF. In 2007, I think it was, there was this massive oil spill off of the West Coast. It was the worst oil spill in Korean history. And ultimately, over the course of several months, over 1 million people volunteered to go out and help clean up. I remember there were images everywhere, all over the news, all over the internet, of people out there with the protective overalls and rubber gloves and bags, and they were just cleaning up all kinds of stuff off of the beaches. It was phenomenal. And then you have the pandemic, and I think this is the best example of the difference between a collectivist society and an individualist society. While we were watching news from America and Europe about people, fighting against mask mandates, raising protests about assaults on their personal liberty, Koreans were waiting in line at pharmacies for their mask allocations, because in the early days of the pandemic, there weren't enough masks to go around. There was no mask mandate, mind you. The demand for masks was high because everybody voluntarily was ready to wear masks. Masks were already part of the culture here. I think really it became more prevalent after the MERS epidemic several years ago, whenever that was. But periodically, even when there's not a pandemic, you see people out on the street wearing masks, maybe because the air quality is bad that day, or maybe because they have some kind of cold. They're coughing, they're sneezing, and they don't want to spray on other people, so they wear a mask. So when the pandemic started, everybody says, oh, I need to wear a mask. Some people already had masks stocked up for those cases when the air is bad or they get a cold. So they were prepared, but people who didn't have masks stocked up had to go to the pharmacies to buy them, and the pharmacies didn't have enough supply. So the masks had to be rationed for the first, few weeks of the pandemic, whatever it was. But there were lines every day, you could see, outside pharmacies, people waiting to get a mask. Now, we eventually did get some mask mandates. In the beginning, I think it was, you couldn't get on the bus or the subway without a mask. But you could walk around outside without a mask. They didn't have a mandate for that, but eventually they did mandate masks everywhere all the time. But it wasn't really necessary. But the point is, Koreans never saw this as an issue of personal liberty. They saw it as an issue of personal responsibility to the group. Mongcheon-tol-song. This is the Mongcheon Fortress, the Mongcheon Wall. So we're still on it. This whole thing here. But there is an aspect of Korean behavior that I didn't fully grasp until I put it into the context of the group collectivism and started comparing it to similar behavior in America. And now I think I get it. In the mid-2000s, there was a scientist. He had gained some renown for cloning a cow in the late 90s. And in the mid-2000s, he published a paper in Science, the journal, the magazine, and about cloning human embryonic stem cells. On the one hand, his work with cloning the cow, being the first one to do it, I think it was, and his work publishing this paper, Koreans were proud of him. I would talk to people and they would mention him. They would ask me if I know him. They took real pride in his accomplishments. But then a moral issue with the project came up in how he obtained the eggs for the project. And that led eventually over time to more accusations that he had falsified data for several of the stem cell lines that he had claimed to have cloned. Ultimately, he admitted to the falsifications. I'll leave a link in the description box below so you can read more about it. In terms of our story here, it was at that point that the attitude of the Korean people started to change. It went from great pride in his accomplishments to great shame in his misdeeds, in his failure. And in both cases, when people asked me about it, I didn't understand why they took it so personally, because I got that from the conversations that I had with people. They really felt it personally. When they asked me, what do you think about Dr. Huang and the scandal, with the stem cells? And I'm like, that's on him. His career is over now. What's that got to do with you? That's got nothing to do with you. That's how I saw it. And I just didn't understand this deep personal insult and shame that they were demonstrating in front of me here. And in thinking about other things I didn't understand back in the day, like how passionate Koreans get about the performance of their sports teams and their athletes on the world stage. You can look at Europeans and how nuts they are about football, but this is a different thing, right? In Korea, it's a very different thing. They're not so much passionate about the sport, whatever the sport may be. They're not so much passionate about the team or about any given individual. For them, it's about the fact that these teams and these individuals are representing them. They're representing the group. It's not just that they're representing the flag. they're representing the country, or they're representing the town. They're representing the people in the group. And that is a big distinction that I only recently came to understand. Oh, this tree is almost 600 years old. Managed by the mayor of Songpagu.
Isn't it a pity? Now isn't it a shame how we break each other's hearts and cause each other pain? How we take each other's love without thinking anymore, forgetting to give back. Isn't it a pity? Some things take so long, but how do I explain? Not too many people can see we're all the same. And because of all the
I think one way to look at this is to consider American patriotism. When I grew up, I remember, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I remember singing the national anthem before any sporting event, a song about the flag. And you think about what has effectively become the modern national anthem in America. Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA. You look at the lyrics, I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died who gave that right to me. Contrast that with the Korean national anthem, where you hear a few instances of our nation, our heart, our resilient spirit. This is a very group-centric, group-oriented song. And that's because the concept of patriotism in Korea is about the group, whereas in America, it's about the symbolism. Americans are a bunch of individuals who are proud to associate themselves with the same symbols, the same ideals, the same spirit as they see it, because not everybody sees it the same way. Koreans are a group of people who aren't associating themselves with symbols as individuals, but who identify with the group of all Koreans. Right? It's just a different way of viewing your national identity. In many instances, it manifests the same way. You go out, you cheer for your team, whether you do so for individual reasons or for, collectivist reasons. You're cheering on the group. But there's definitely a very big difference in how you perceive these things. If an American scientist goes out and disgraces himself on the global stage we're all going to look at it and say, dude screwed up. Forget about it. We're not going to feel shame or embarrassment, or we're not going to dwell on it months or years later. A lot of people are probably going to mock him and insult him. But no, in Korea, Dr. Hwang goes out and disgraces not only himself, but all Koreans. Because when he goes out on the world stage, he's not just representing Korea, he is Korea, in the sense that he is every Korean in that moment. His shame is their shame. His pride is their pride. And I think this is something that arises out of that group collectivism. Now, I'm talking about all this stuff without having read any papers on collectivism or individualism. I have a lot of interest. I read books and papers on a lot of things, historical topics, neuroscience, technology, but I've never read anything about collectivism or individualism, and I should. I'm really interested now in the past few weeks of, thinking about this now and again. I'm really interested in going out and seeing if there are any specific papers about collectivism in Korea. See if it aligns with my understanding, this understanding that I've come to, that I've been talking about in this video. Going back to the question that prompted all this deep thought, how has Korea changed me? And my initial impulse to talk about how it's made me more collectivist and kind of dampened my individualist streak. That's not the case. It hasn't made me collectivist. It hasn't made me more collectivist. It's made me better understand collectivism and how it influences our thinking. It's helped me better appreciate my own culture when I contrast and compare it to the group collectivism in Korea. And I hope this gives you some food for thought in your considerations of Korean culture, whatever they may be. And when you're reading about Korea, or you hear about Korea in the news, or Korean people, or Korean teams, maybe see what happens if you try to interpret that through the prism of Korea's group collectivism. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for joining me on this walk around through Olympic Park and this old Baekje fortification. And thanks for liking, thanks for subscribing. I will see you in the next video. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.